In the UK, we have a term called special educational needs. These are students with either physical or learning disabilities to which we have to support. In the classroom setting, this comes through the use of additional physical personnel to support the young person, as well as obviously approaches to teaching, so such as adaptive teaching and differentiation. How we implement that in a more virtual setting was quite tricky, because we didn't have obviously an additional adult, for example, working with the student. So again, we had to make sure that students had access to the appropriate devices, but also the appropriate materials so that they could access learning throughout the period of school closure. The word safeguarding is obviously a key role of any educator across the world, and that is just to make sure that young people are safe. And so again, thinking about how we did that was going to be a critical point in time. Pedagogy. I'm going to speak a lot about pedagogy because I think this underpins anything that we do in education, and particularly when we think about the use of technology. Teachers have to be very skilled in not only how the technology can support them, but the impact that it can have. And whether, in my opinion, and whether the way that we've run our remote learning, are teachers using the right tool for the job? And finally, assessment. So how are we going to assess young people during this period of school closure and make use of digital tools to do that? And I'm going to share lots of those with you. And the ones I'm going to share will be relevant to whether you are a school or you have young people that have very limited access to technology, or a school that has far more developed access to technology. The school closures that first happened actually in March 2020, not 2021, come about at quite short notice. So English schools only had 48 hours, 2 days notice to be told that we were to be closing our doors and students were not to be attending school, they were to be learning from home. This comes as quite a shock to us. We knew that the pandemic was developing, but we weren't necessarily expecting such short notice to close the schools. But our government had to act in a way to best support, obviously, the country and the global situation that was occurring at the time. I would say this proved very challenging for the majority of schools, because unlike our school, lots of schools were starting at a point whereby students didn't have access to technology or a device. Once more, there was not only the issue with the device, but we also know that some families and some homes didn't have access to internet. Our schools, though, did remain open to vulnerable students and also students of key workers. Just to define that for everybody, key workers in the UK was people like educators, teachers, hospital staff, nurses, doctors. So those that were keeping the key services running in the UK whilst the global pandemic was at its utmost. Now I want to come on to what we learned from the delivery of education remotely. And I think this is important when we're thinking about technology full stop. The first thing is that high quality teaching is far more important than the mode or how lessons are delivered. To explain this further, you as teachers and myself as a teacher, we are the experts when it comes to delivering education. Over a number of years, we have developed our practice to know how we can enable students to learn best, make the most progress, and also get the most out of it. Now, just because technology is being brought into the frame or being spoken about, in my eyes, it doesn't always have to be used. I'll give you an example. In our setting, when we moved to deliver remotely, lots of lessons or lots of staff were keen to deliver lessons live. So for example, through a platform like we're on today, like Zoom, or for us, Google Meet. But what I said was actually, you don't necessarily need to spend the whole hour doing that. You wouldn't spend a whole hour or 50-minute lesson, or however long your lesson duration is, always being at the forefront, always being at the front of the class delivering. Actually, could you make use of other tools and techniques? So for example, set the lesson up, for example, give instructions via a meeting platform like this, but still get students to work at home in the traditional way. using exercise books, textbooks, and so on and so forth. So what I'm saying here is, and my advice to anybody that's considering using technology for remote delivery, or if you're wanting to bring it into your school setting, only use it when it's going to add value. Will it improve the quality of your lesson delivery? I also like to think of it like this. Is the use of technology going to have an impact? This is what I mean by authentic use versus tokenistic use. So authentic, I mean, are you actually using this for a given purpose? So for example, I think a great use of technology is through modeling. So for example, using something like a visualizer where you are writing an answer based on maybe students' ideas. So maybe to an exam question, you're writing an answer that students can physically see you do. They can see you writing. I think that's a brilliant use of technology. That's an authentic use of technology. Maybe a more tokenistic use of technology might be to make students feel like something's fun, to bring in an educational game, for example. How much value is that game adding, or is it just because you're wanting to make the lesson more engaging? The second point is about access. And having spoken to the organisers of this event, as I've said many times already, I know that access in Kazakhstan varies considerably from schools and students maybe in remote village settings with less access, all the way up to maybe inner city schools that have far more access. But when you are considering, or if you are considering the use of technology to support remote education or just to support teaching more traditionally in school, access is really important. This concept of a digital divide, I think, can have a real impact on student progress. If a student is disadvantaged already through not having a device to use at home or in school, well, then they're completely unable to access the learning. So I think all schools, and particularly if there's any school leaders or system leaders here, thinking about access is absolutely critical. In the United Kingdom and in England, we have something called pupil premium funding. And this is a figure given to students that are disadvantaged. We use this funding stream in order to help, we have used, this funding stream to help supply students with devices on a loan basis so that they could access this. Another thing that we found is that peer interactions can provide significant motivation for students and also help them to make more rapid progress. Now, I think this is fairly obvious, but I think certainly me, and I hope you'll share the same belief as me, in this classroom setting, allowing students to talk, to discuss ideas, debate, and then feedback, it's just a given. We just do it. It's part of our day-to-day, it's in our toolkit, isn't it? It's just one of the things that we use to deliver high quality teaching. But if we're in a remote setting, for example, in a setting like this, where we're using a digital platform in order to discuss, that's quite hard. And for a young person, that's going to be quite brave in order maybe to raise their hand in the platform or just unmute their microphone in order to engage in discussion. So again, later on in today's session, I'm going to look at some of the digital tools that can be used to improve the prospects of interactivity between learners, but also between you as the educator, the teacher, and the student as well. My own reflections were that particularly very early on in the delivery of remote education, I would sit at home or sit in school and I'll be delivering a lesson on a platform like this, like Zoom. I would ask a question and I'd wait and I'd wait and there'd be silence and I'd think, oh, do they not understand it? Are they just too worried to embarrass themselves in front of their friends? So again, I want to help you by not having these same pitfalls as what I found, because it was quite awkward at times. Supporting students to work independently can also improve outcomes is something that we found. Going back to what I said a moment ago about, delivering methods that maybe where teachers were providing lots of instructions written or like this through a conferencing platform, these obviously are very beneficial. However, we also found that students did work best under direction and guidance in a more independent fashion. So for example, promoting research skills using digital technologies. We have to do this very carefully and structured, because just giving students a task, just giving students quite an open task to go away and work upon independently, lots of our students found quite difficult, because in the classroom, they could easily raise their hand, they would quickly interact with their friend or their peers in order to ascertain, you know, some guidance, support, some help, some direction, are they on the right tracks? So providing what we would call clear scaffolds was really, really important. And for us, scaffolds might be clear direction, i.e. go and watch this video on YouTube or another platform. Use this particular website in order to carry out that academic research. Use this resource from maybe one of our exam boards in the UK to help you answer that question. And then finally, and this is quite obvious, different approaches to remote learning are needed to meet the needs of different pupils. We all know that every one of the young people that we work with is not the same, they don't learn the same, and they make progress at different rates. So therefore, that idea about adaptability and making changes on the fly is necessary, but that's just teaching you what you already know. What I'm trying to make the point about here is, the problem is, and we found this when we first entered that delivery of remote education, we didn't know too much about the different approaches. We weren't very skilled in delivering lessons via a digital platform. It's the first time we've actually had students at home, teachers in another place, and then we're using digital tools to do that. So again, for the school leaders that we've got on this call today, it's about providing the appropriate training so teachers know the different approaches. Choosing the right tool for the job, like I just spoke about a minute ago, is quite tough. There's lots of models that can help those. So some of you may have heard of the Tpack Framework, the SAMA model, and the IPAC Framework. These are three significant models when it comes to pedagogies that underpin the use of digital tools or technologies. And you can see in this diagram, we've got things like authenticity, student choice, mobility, adaptive, and collaboration. Now, if I think about those 5 broad headings, in a normal lesson, in a normal way that we educate students, we're probably blending all of these things into a lesson. So for example, we would be maybe giving students choice, i.e. what task are you going to complete? What will you do once you've finished that task? Authenticity, for example, we might bring in real-world examples through the use of a video, or through the use of even, you know, real-world experience, getting a speaker in to bring a particular topic alive. Collaboration, we've spoken about this already, but the idea that students will work together, there'll be peer interaction, there might even be peer learning or peer marking where students are assessing one another's work or answers. But against these 5 broad concepts, what we need to know is what tools can help underpin each one. So what tools allow for collaboration? What tools can allow for authenticity? In my eyes, the traditional teaching methods may still always be the most impactful. And now that we've returned in the United Kingdom and in England in particular to teaching back in schools, we've had to make some decisions, because we found that some tools that we use digitally or in the remote setting are absolutely worth continuing with, and something that we will continue to invest time in. We found that student progress increased, student engagement increased, maybe parental engagement increased as well. But equally, it's worth saying that traditional teaching methods may be best. And this is what I come back to, the idea that at this school, in our school, we have used the term blended learning, where nothing's been necessarily replaced per se, but we are making really good choices. We think about the pedagogy and think, okay, I'm going to be teaching this lesson. I have these particular learners with these particular needs, and I want to reach this outcome. What's the best way of doing that? And because we have used technology, we've almost expanded a teacher's, I'm going to call it a toolkit. I hope that translates okay, but like something you can dip into and choose from. So we've obviously got all of our normal traditional teaching methods that we would have in the classroom, but now expanding this through the use of digital tools allows us just to dip in. Have I got an online tool for low stakes quizzing? Should I be using an online or a digital tool for assessment? And this is what I think has been most powerful to us. And again, I don't want you to think that you can only expand this toolkit when every student's got a device. That's absolutely not the case. It might be, for example, that you as a teacher has a device, a smartphone, a tablet device, a laptop, a desktop PC. That's enough to get started, just to expand that toolkit to bring digital learning into the classroom if it's best placed. Or it might be that your students have mobile phones. Now, in most UK schools, we don't allow for mobile phones to be on during the school day, but that's at a school level. But for example, they can use those at home. Or you might be in a setting where you have access to maybe a suite of computers or tablets that you can load into your classroom for a session or a day. Access to technology doesn't have to be one student having their own device. It comes through many ways. I'm going to explore a few ideas further. This mantra, though, is really important. So I'm hoping you join this session because you're interested about technology. When we brought a system whereby students were going to have a one-to-one device, their own physical device in the classroom, what I didn't want any of our teachers to think is this: have I used technology in the classroom today? I didn't want any teacher to ever ask themselves that, like it was a tick box, like we're saying, yes, I've used technology today, that's great. I didn't want that at all. What I wanted to for teachers to ask themselves is, now that students have a device and staff have a device, have I used the most appropriate tool in order to provide the best learning opportunities and allow for students to make the most progress? So again, if you're a teacher on here today or a school leader and you're thinking about this and thinking, okay, there's some takeaways here, maybe I could try this. What I never want you to think, what I never want you to see this as is a tick box. Now I've got this technology, I must use it in every lesson. No, we are the experts. We know how students learn best. But in saying that, you will need to take advice. You will need to train. You will need to think, okay, I've got these tools and technologies. How am I going to upskill? How am I going to know which is the best? But your gut, what's in here, will tell you what's best for your students. I was asked to deliver a little bit about assessment, and I just want to touch upon this. So I think digital tools, the use of digital tools, has really helped the schools that I've worked with hundreds of schools in the UK and across Europe. I think this is a great way of enabling teachers to know more about their students, what they've learned, how much have they remembered, and where are the knowledge gaps. And I think digital tools are really brilliant at doing that. So I want to give you some advice and show you some examples. First of all, simplicity is key. Simplicity is very important. For example, if you're using a digital tool for formative assessment, it needs to be very coherent, very easy to follow, step by step, but also it needs to be easy for you to access the results or how you're maybe going to assess it. So for example, what you wouldn't want is loads of different formats of maybe an assessment coming back to you, because that's unhelpful. It almost needs to mirror what you would do inside the classroom, whereby if you were to set something up, you would know how it's coming in. The ability to provide comments and ease of providing comments is really important. So how are we going to give feedback to students based upon this? And you have to think about that before you set a task digitally. I'm going to show you a really good example of that. How are students going to respond to your feedback? And I hope this is something we all consider when we're planning assessment, because feedback from the teacher is so valuable, but it's only valuable if the students have listened to it and if they can do something with it. And I also like when students, and this is great, digital tools are great at this, when students are able to see each other's work, where students say, oh, I made that mistake too. Let's work together to improve that. Or I made a mistake here, but you did really well in that section. How can I improve mine? I love that. And digital tools are great at that. I want to give you a couple of examples. This is one of our sociology teachers, one of our A-level teachers here. Really simple. This was just a Google Doc that was running, and she was being able to give feedback on different sections. Really easy. So asking probing questions. What happens if one part of society performs its functions? So you can see the teacher has simply highlighted, given feedback. What the student then did after this is then reply to that, so that the teacher knew that they had not only responded to the feedback and done something with it, they could also check their understanding again. Really individualized. Here's another example. So again, you can see here that this is a work that's been submitted via a platform we use called Google Classroom. Some of you may be familiar with it. Can you see what I've highlighted on the right-hand side? Add to comment bank. We've all been there. We've all been there when we're assessing work and go, oh, that same mistake. They made that student's made the mistake. That student's made the mistake. It's one of those common misconceptions. It's probably something that we as educators are going to go back and reteach. But how many times, and I know I've done it, how many times do I write the same comment over and over again? In a digital tool, using digital tools, we seldom have to do that because we have these things called comment banks. You can see, as I've highlighted on the screen there, that you can add to a comment bank. So each time you want to say the same thing, you haven't got to type it in again. This is one of the other advantages that I wanted to bring about today. There are significant savings here, efficiency savings for teacher workload. We all work really hard as educators. And I think any moment we can get back, so particularly for repetitive tasks, we should make use of these tools in order to support us. Thinking about Microsoft Office Lens, you may have heard this. This is what it looks like in action. So this is where a teacher is doing something slightly different. So you can see the same teacher here is highlighting work that was submitted by hand. So the student has actually submitted this work in a written format. That's because in the United Kingdom and England, most exams are still handwritten. They're not typed, they're not on computer. So if they're handwritten, we want students to practice in that way. But this teacher still felt that, okay, well, they can write it by hand, but I still want to assess online because it's quicker for me. It allows much greater depth of feedback. As you can see here, Office Lens has been used to do the highlighting and some annotation, and then the teacher's given feedback on the right-hand side, giving the students some probing questions. The bits that are blanked out, by the way, are just because that's our students' work and it's got our students' name in it. So we've had to blank that out. But under those grey boxes is students responding to the teacher's feedback. I want to talk about retrieval practice now. Retrieval practice is all about reactivating knowledge so that it can be built upon again, and I'm sure you know that already. This process of constantly recalling information on a regular basis helps to commit knowledge to long-term memory. And when we think about, particularly in England, terminal assessments is how we assess students in England at age 16 and 18. These are nationalised exams. We need students to commit lots of knowledge to long-term memory. So spaced retrieval and interleaving. So spaced retrieval where you're regularly revisiting topics, and interleaving where you're weaving one topic alongside another to really bolster understanding, have a significant impact. And there are some fantastic digital tools for this. And then, as we talked about before, we had to also blend this into our remote learning strategy as well, because we didn't want it to, it's part of our learning routine here at our school, and therefore when we went remote, we always wanted to keep that going. For example, for us, this is often the start of every lesson. How are we going to recap prior knowledge? Here's a great example. This is a tool called Socrative. Again, lots of our teachers here make use of this tool at the start of some lessons. And you can see here what it's giving us. We've blanked the names out again, apologies, on the left-hand side. But you can start to see percentage scores, but also which questions students got wrong. So the numbers at the top, 1, 2, 3, etc. These are the question numbers. And then we can start to see common misconceptions. For example, there's a large volume of students who didn't get questions 7 and 4 right. That helps us with reteaching. What have they forgotten? How can I help them better to improve? And here it is again in Socrative, another tool. You can see again.
10 minutes left.
Yes, thank you. And you can see where students got things right and wrong to help with the sort of deviation of your lesson. How will you change your lesson in order to best support those learners? Here's another example. This is using a slightly different tool. This one's Google Forms. You may or may not be familiar with these. Google Forms over the last few years has really developed and enables you to create what I would call things like low stakes quizzes very quickly. And again, you can start to see here, you can get some insights into how well students have done. This isn't something you've got to analyze as a classroom teacher. This is immediate. This really helps us understand the benefits of what retrieval has done for our learners, but also where those knowledge gaps are. This prevents us having to take in a little test and maybe mark it, tick it, or think, okay, the students have got this set of questions wrong, that set of questions correct. This is immediate. And this is where the power comes in. You can almost change your immediate teaching practice in order to respond to learner needs. And here's another view. A question, this is by student level. So you can see exactly which questions each student has got right and wrong. Some of you may have heard of Plickers. This is a really good tool where students don't have access to technology. But maybe you can see, like this example, this picture was actually taken in a school in South America where there was quite a lot of poverty, and the students don't have access to devices, but the teacher had a smartphone. There's a use of technology. It's still making use of technology to support learning. What Plickers enables you to do is very quickly, basically these printed out cards have 3 sides to them. And depending on, sorry, 4 sides, it's a rectangle, right? So sorry, yeah, 4 sides. And based on what way the student turns their paper will be maybe answer A, answer B, C, and D. Now you're probably thinking, well, I could do that without technology. The difference here is you're getting that analysis straight away. You run your camera across the classroom, and immediately you can see the percentage scores. Again, helping us think about how we may further change teaching and learning. Finally, we're going to quickly talk about collaboration. I want us to talk about collaboration between staff and students. I also want to talk about how collaboration outside of the classroom can help workload efficiencies and saving. I'm going to quickly talk about that now. The G Suite for Education, or Google Drive and its associated programs such as Docs, Sheets, etc., has completely changed the way in which teachers in our school and other schools in the UK plan and share resources. For example, on a shared drive, everybody has access. There's no need to be emailing documents, no need to have USB or pen drives flying around, but that's not the main benefit. The main benefit is that teachers can collaborate in real time. For example, you can be planning a lesson, planning a scheme of work, creating resources, all at the same time. It's a live document that everybody can work upon. People can add comments to give everybody feedback. We have developed some of the highest quality of resources, but also in the shortest amount of time, whilst using online tools in order to do that. And that's not talking about it being in the classroom. This is at the planning stage where teachers are hard at work getting ready. We also know that that student engagement can be increased through collaboration, but also, and most importantly, groupings must be really well considered to support to support rapid progress for all learners. So again, as I've already mentioned, the G Suite for Education has been fundamental in this school, but I equally know that Microsoft Teams and Office 365 has been so influential in other schools. And that, like I said, I'm talking about like an administrative level here. Easy collaboration, sharing, real-time editing with one another, being able to provide comments and suggestions. Here's another form of collaboration. This one's in class. This is a little tool called Padlet. You may have heard of it. This is so simple. This is students being able to work both remotely or in the classroom, being able to put ideas up onto a virtual, almost like a pin board, where you've almost got like post-it notes that you're posting onto the classroom board. This is virtual. What do I like about this? This doesn't go anywhere. Unlike maybe what you're doing with you might do with post-it notes on the board, that's hard to come back to in future lessons. This you've got all the time, and you can share it with another class, with other students. You can add to it across many lessons. This is why I like this idea, but more so, everybody can see it. Everybody can see what everybody else is doing, learning from one another. Here's another example from a media studies lesson. This is using a similar tool, but this is called Google Jamboard. Again, very similar. We've got students analysing successes and frustrations, and then being able to put those all on one place. Again, this can be shared. You can come back to this 1, 2, 3 weeks, however many weeks or months later. I just want to point you into the direction of this. If you've been interested about anything that I've said today, our school, Sandringham School, has created an evidence-informed pedagogy guide for the use of technologies. This was for remote learning, but also this will be appropriate for the use of technology more broadly as well. It's free to download, and you can see the web link there. If you go to sandagogy.co.uk, you will find it. And as I say, free to use, access. It is in the English language, but it is in a PDF format where you'll be able to translate into Kazakh, Russian, or any other language. And this is the type of thing that it will do. It will give you some ideas about what formative assessment, for example, this is an example of formative assessment looks like, but then gives you, what would this look like? What could this look like? How could this look in terms of a digital tool supporting the normal traditional teaching methods? Now, I have gone on a little bit longer than I thought, but I'll hand back over to our host to see if there was any short questions that I can take.
So, Mark, thank you very much. It was very interesting. I have a question about bring your own device program. So your school practices this program from 2014. So the question is, was the school at least somehow ready for distance learning during pandemic, comparing it with other schools?
This is an excellent question. So I would say, obviously, we had the major advantage is students had a device. That was the significant advantage that we had. However, whilst it would be easy to think, oh, that's fine, they know what they're doing, they've had the device for a while, we hadn't used devices in that way, where the teacher and student were remote from each other, and trying to continue to deliver lessons or education was somewhat tricky. So I'll give you a really easy example. We didn't have any protocols, or we didn't really know what Google Meet was. We'd never used it. Sounds crazy. We'd never used Google Meet. We'd never used a platform like this to communicate with students, and we hadn't got any protocols for that or rules. So again, things like that had to be considered within the 48 hours notice that we gave. What I would say is, it'd be very easy to sit here and think, well, it was easy for them. We learned so much, and we reflected so much, and we have changed since coming back.
Okay, thank you. Another question, you talk about combining traditional methods with new technologies. So, and how about blending offline learning with online learning?
Yeah.
So,
yes, so absolutely. And for us, this was something that we've really considered since coming back. So I talked about independence earlier, and that's often where online comes with offline comes with online. So, for example, in a remote situation, we were maybe setting up just giving instructions for students using the online method, but then they were using more traditional methods, for example, the use of paper resources, workbooks, textbooks, in order to support their learning. Because ultimately, you know, students need the skills in both. I know in our country, students are assessed in a written form, but also, you know, when we think about preparing students for the world of work, they need to be well versed in both those offline and online skills.
Great. Thank you, Mark. I think everybody get useful information for themselves. So for now, that's all. I'm finishing my session.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. If you have some questions in the future, can we mail them to discuss this?
Absolutely. You feel free to. Thank you very much. And I hope everybody is well and safe in Kazakhstan. All the best. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Goodbye.
Thank you. Bye now.